Well, hi and welcome back. We are glad you could join us for another episode of our Equipping the Saints podcast. I'm Bob, joined here with Todd, and we are coming to you from Maranatha Bible Church, and we are in Comstock Park, Michigan, just outside of Grand Rapids. So we are finishing our series today, kind of our sub-series. So our series is looking at family matters, and then kind of a subset of that, we have been looking at singles in the church and what the Bible has to say about singleness generally, and narrowing it kind of down to specifics. So we had received some questions a couple weeks ago that we wanted to address. So this is our third week doing the questions, so we're going to round off that sub-series on singleness today. We'll continue on with some of the family stuff for the next few weeks. But so for today, we did have two specific questions we wanted to finish with. One will be fairly short, and then we'll end with a really good question, which I was very thankful for, to be honest with you. So the first question, though, is it says, Bob and Todd, how did you pursue your wives, right? So we'll start with you, and how was it that you came about to see Julie and ultimately pursue her and then end up in marriage?
That's getting a little personal.
Yeah, well, it's just you and I, so it's fine. Don't worry about it.
That's even more awkward. We can handle the theological questions, right? This one's
I agree.
Personal. No, that's a great question, and by no means are we the models and how to go about doing this,
Absolutely.
But happy to share a little bit about how we went from single to married. And like we said a few weeks ago, there is no magic way to do this, but we've been trying to flesh out some of these principles. So here's the short version of it. So Julie and I met in high school. First day of 11th grade.
Oh.
She had been at a Christian high school, and I had been going to the public high school, and she had had enough of the Christian high school and was able to convince her parents to start going to the public high school.
Nice.
And so first day of 11th grade year in Hudsonville, we met. And
The first day?
The first day, yeah.
Wow.
It was a big pep assembly or something to kick off the school year. And
Yeah.
so one of my friends became her friend, and so they sat next to me.
Wow.
And so I meet this new girl named Julie, and I'll be honest, the first thing I'm attracted to is she's physically attractive. And so I noticed that and then started to get to know her a little bit over the next few weeks, and I start to kind of like her, and I start to, as best you can when you're 16.
Sure.
And so I asked her out on a date in October. We debate whether it was October 15 or 16, 1987, but we went on our first date. I know that's a while back, isn't it? That's dating myself, isn't it? We went on our first date, and we dated our whole junior year. I should add that I was not a believer in high school, and my wife was. But I put myself off as a believer, so she assumed she was dating a believer, which was not the case. So we dated the whole junior year, and by the end of the junior year, she promptly dumped me because she knew I was not a Christian. And
That's a good move on her part.
that was a good move on her part. I agree. So maybe, ladies, that's a good thing. And so, I realized, I actually at that point, I didn't really realize why that I was not a believer, that it contributed to that. But looking back, I can see that was what it was. So anyway, fast forward to the senior year of high school, and we dated. No, we didn't date. We kind of talked a little bit senior year, not a lot. She was on student council. I was on student council, but we didn't really interact much with each other. So fast forward graduation from high school, we each went our way, separate ways. I went off to Colorado to the Air Force Academy and went through basic training. Her mom said to Julie, "Hey, you might want to just write Todd, he's in basic training, it's hard." So she started corresponding, I started corresponding back. That kind of rekindled our friendship. Somewhere around end of freshman, sophomore year in college, I got saved, and every once in a while I'd come back to Michigan and we'd catch up a little bit, nothing fancy. But then at the summer between sophomore and junior year, I came home and we started to rekindle that friendship a little more intentionally, and actually started dating once again. And
So when she came back, was it you pursuing her and like, hey, let's get together? Or was it just, let's meet up because we've been already communicating?
We've been communicating, but my heart was increasingly growing towards her and increasingly realizing, now having become a believer, starting to see, even as a young 8, 19, 20-year-old, she has the qualities that model godliness. And she has the qualities that I would want to pursue in a wife. And so, so I'm initiating that relationship a little bit more intentionally. We start dating junior year, dated the whole junior year of college. And towards the end of that year, even though we were dating long distance, we were starting to talk more intentionally about what would marriage look like? Would her heart go that way? I was trying to be careful not to lead her on too much. I wanted to protect her heart, but I also didn't want to drag my feet.
Sure.
And there's a balance between those two. So somewhere between junior, senior year, I realized this is the woman that I think I want to spend the rest of my life with.
Junior, senior year of college.
College.
Yeah.
And so I asked her to marry me in that summer, and so I went.
You're home from college?
I'm home from college for about 6 weeks doing an internship at a hospital, and we get engaged. We have over a year to wait, about a year to wait, because I still had to finish college. And so I go back out to Colorado and graduate, and then we get married. But I guess the short of it is just trying to recognize that my responsibility was to lead that relationship. I wasn't waiting for her to make the moves. I really sensed, even as a young believer at that point, that I needed to be the one that was just directing that thing, and kind of a define the relationship kind of thing. It wasn't formal like that. We didn't call it that, but I just realized I needed to initiate that. So I talked to her dad, asked for his permission to ask her to marry me, and so that's the short version of it. So the Lord's been faithful. 28 years later, we're still married, and thankful for His grace.
Awesome.
So now it's your turn.
Yeah, mine's not so exciting. I showed up. I told her to get in my truck. Let's get married. And no, I'm just kidding.
Wow, that's fast.
That's fast. That's it. No, it was. We did not meet in high school, so I wasn't saved till I was 24. And she grew up in the church. Grew up as a believer, and I had only been saved maybe a year and a half, maybe a year when we first met. I moved from California back to Michigan. Walked into church, and she was singing on the worship team. She was playing the hand drums, and they had this track lighting, and all the lights were out except for the one that was shining on her.
It was a sign.
I kid you not, right? And I really felt that God spoke to me. No, so obviously noticed her. Yeah. So obviously I noticed her.
Yeah.
And this is a good thing for singles to realize is at that stage the church probably had 50 people we walked into. And she was the single lady in the church. And I walked in and I saw her and immediately said, this is a girl I want to be with.
So now, you can find your spouse in a small church.
Find my spouse in a small church, that's right. And it was interesting because she is, after getting saved at the age of 24, I didn't date. I didn't have anything to do. I actually thought I'd be single. And so I was looking into doing missions work overseas. And so I was kind of leading towards doing that. And then I walked into the church. I'd settled on my singleness. This is what I'm going to be, and that's fine. And then I walked into the church, and there's my future wife, unbeknownst to her at that moment. But at least to me, it was, this is a woman that I want to marry. And so I obviously pursued her and said, hey, let's go out and talk to each other. And there was a little bit of help because she was also the registrar for a Bible college that was there. So I said, I want to take Bible college classes. So I said, hey, let's talk about this. And so she says, we can talk right here. I said, no, let's talk over lunch instead. And
so did you really want to go to Bible college, or were you interested in the registrar?
Either way, they both ended up well. Went to Bible college and married the registrar. So all of that being said, through it, there was a couple key moments, kind of like how Sharon or Julie's mom kind of told Julie, like, hey, why don't you send him a letter? You know, when Sue and I were dating, it had been about 4 months. And I remember the pastor coming to me to church, and he said, hey, it's time for you to make a decision. Like, you can't lead this girl on. And I said, yeah, you know what, you're right. And so my dad and I took a trip overseas together and then really got some clarity just by praying and asking some other pastors that we were with just for godly input and wisdom. And I remember coming back home, and the week I got back home, I went and bought a ring and then asked her to marry me. And so I think we dated 6 months or 9 months and then engaged for 6 months, something around in that area. But yeah, she was waiting on me. And for those, I would also say, you know, I'd only been saved like a year and a half. And so she was far past me spiritually. At that stage, I remember first going out because she was good friends with the pastor and his wife and some other couples in church, and they'd go out for lunch every day or every Sunday after church. And I remember them talking, and they'd be laughing and making jokes about the Bible or whatever, and I'd be sitting over there awkwardly like, I didn't even know that was in the Bible. And so I was really faced with two options. Option one was, okay, she's far superior to me in spiritual matters, so I just don't want anything to do with her. Or I could say, I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to study the Word of God so I can lead this woman like I'm supposed to because she's the one I want to marry. And so obviously I chose the latter, and I'm thankful that I did. But I'm also thankful that she had long suffering in seeing me grow from a newly saved individual into the relationship and where we are now.
She saw teachability in your heart.
She saw teachability, she saw growth. I started meeting with the pastor a couple times a week, obviously going through some Bible college as well. And so all of those things were in order for me to prepare myself to lead her. Even though I had the girl first, so to speak, the motivation was I wanted to be a husband that she'd be able to follow, and not just follow because the Bible commands her, but follow because she could see those characteristics in me. Yeah. And the only way you could do that is by being saturated with the Word of God. So
that's good.
I proposed to her. She said yes, and well, here we are, 16 years later, and still going strong. So I would just encourage men: don't look at your own life and think, oh, I can't do this. Because if that woman is the woman that you want, pursue her and go and get her, and don't let these other things get in the way. And as you said, preparing your heart you saw a woman who was godly and who you thought, hey, this is the woman that I want, not just physically, but then spiritually as well. And so you set everything else aside and you pursued her. Yeah. And so I think that's really good counsel.
Yeah, I think what you said is interesting, that you were not at a spiritual level that she was.
Right.
Nor was I. My wife was actually very far ahead of me spiritually when we got married. And yet the Lord grew me and stretched me and put me in place where I had to be forced to grow into a spiritual leader. That was not natural to me.
Right.
So there can be growth in all of that stuff. Absolutely. In those early years. So, and I think the other thing I liked what you said is you met her in church. And you saw her serving the Lord. You saw her engaged in ministry, and so that was a great way just to see her character come out, and you could get to know her in that context, which is a great place. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's a great context.
Yeah, and when you're the only one she can choose from,
your odds are pretty good.
Odds are pretty good. Imagine if she just said no. So I hope that's helpful in whatever way it can be helpful. Just kind of knowing, like Todd said, there's no cookie cutter way to do this, but the one thing that's consistent is the man taking the initiative, the man taking the responsibility to reach out to the woman that he desires to marry or date. So, all right, so that was the first question. So question number 2, and we'll spend the next 15, 20 minutes on this, which I will say, as we talked about before, I think it's a really good question.
Great question.
And I never would have thought of it myself, so I'm thankful it came along. But the question was, what are some things that you and I have seen in post-marital counseling that could have been taken care of or at least worked on in greater detail in premarital counseling, right? And so what are some things you could talk to young individuals or people getting married before they actually get married, so down the road, either they'll have some tools in their toolbox to work on them, or they won't even come up because they already have worked on them kind of a premarital.
Yeah, it's a great question. What you're getting at here is what are the things that we see in marriages 5, 10, 15, 20 years after that maybe that young couple going into marriage really didn't know or anticipate. And that's obviously, it's hard because you're not going to know all those things ahead of time anyway. And some, we say, the best way to learn how to preach is to preach. The best way to learn how to be married is to be married.
Right.
So there's a sense in which some of this you can't really flesh out ahead of time. You have to experience it. But I think the question's a good one in that it might make you aware of some things. And so one of the things that, we put a list together before the podcast. One of the things that we put on there is just how much work marriage takes.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of couples who go into marriage with rose-colored glasses, and they're looking at the rainbows and the unicorns and the pixie dust and thinking this thing's going to be wonderful. There's going to just be fireworks all the time and it's going to be wonderful and no problems. And then you have that first fight. And then it gets a little more difficult, and the challenge is there about how we're going to get along. And so I don't think couples think a lot about the requirement to deny yourself. And that's what I mean by work. I don't mean secular work out of employment, or I just mean heart work. That I don't think a lot of people anticipate that. I think we did a whole series or a whole podcast once on the sanctifying influence of marriage. And I'm not sure people truly understand that, and probably can't fully understand that, about how much work it's going to take for you to humble yourself and deny yourself and really be willing to crucify the flesh in order for that marriage to be healthy. Most people just go into marriage thinking, man, this is going to be great. We're going to have a blast, and kind of plan out when they're going to have kids. And, it's all wonderful, and there's nothing wrong with thinking about that. But when the rubber meets the road, marriage it can be hard work.
Absolutely.
It can be really hard work when someone, crosses you and you don't want to forgive them, and you have some hard conversations, and there's issues that come up in both of your hearts that you're maybe both not willing to deal with initially, and you want to be right rather than holy, and you want to be the one who comes out on top of the argument rather than really seeking the unity of that marriage. And so I think that's a big issue that I think it catches some couples off guard. Wait, I got to work at this? I have to crucify my flesh? The gospel is deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. That's the gospel. Well, guess what? That's the core of a healthy marriage as well.
And it doesn't end.
It doesn't end. I mean, we hopefully grow and become more holy so that it's not as difficult, but the issue is still there, that every day, day by day, I have to be constantly killing sin and crucifying the flesh. And that takes work. That takes heart work that a lot of us don't want to do, frankly, because we just want to be right and we're sinners.
Yeah, it's true. I think one of the reasons why I've seen, at least, is once you meet with somebody after they're married, they'll say, well, we've gone through Ephesians 5. We've gone through these before. And they think the rest of the Bible doesn't pertain to them because it's not specifically Paul or Peter saying, now to the married I say this. But he says to the church. And so we forget that we're living with another Christian, and we forget that we are to love one another. All the one another's in the Bible aren't just for the context of 2 hours on Sunday morning.
Right.
They're for your entire life.
That's
and
right.
how you interact with each other. And so it is hard work, and it's not hard work because somebody's hard to love. It's hard work because we love ourselves too much.
That's exactly right.
And yeah, I think a lot of issues would be squashed or at least tempered for people to step back and say, why am I in this situation? You look at James, right? Why do fights and wars come from among you? Because you want and do not have. And so you look at that in the context of marriage. How many times have you gotten angry in marriage because you wanted something and it didn't happen? And so just like your 3-year-old, you scream out and you yell at your wife or you yell at somebody else. And meanwhile, I mean, that's not how we're called to treat one another.
Yeah.
And so I think that heart work of knowing, hey, when you're going into this, it's going to be hard. And it's okay to say marriage is hard. In fact, I would say you should preface it with that.
Yeah.
Because you have two selfish single people coming together to live
Yeah.
for the first time ever together. And
Yeah.
now you have to learn how to live with another selfish person.
Yeah. That doesn't take away the joy of marriage.
Absolutely.
And I would think we want to be careful to say that we're not saying all of marriage is just
Of course not.
hard duty, there's a joy to marriage, but don't be surprised when the Lord uses your spouse to unearth sinful tendencies in your heart.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with those.
Yeah.
And I think couples who end up, divorcing after 10, 15, 20 years, they're not willing to do the hard work.
Well, that's where you get that phrase, irreconcilable differences.
Yeah.
He or she didn't do what I wanted him to do,
Yeah.
so we're different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, too, that joy stems from the fact that you've worked through that stuff together.
Yeah.
And so there's great joy when you realize you're wrong and they realize they're wrong and you both humbly come to one another. And, man, there's just that joyous kind of coming together, preferring the other one, and really you can see that love come. So, yeah, absolutely.
What's another one we had on the list?
Another one we had was... and I like this one. We did talk about this in a podcast, but just kind of reiterate it. Relationship between personal and marital spiritual life. So the amount of time the man and the wife, the man and the woman put into their own personal spiritual lives is going to be directly reflected in the health of the overall marriage.
That's right.
And so if the man is neglecting his spiritual time in the Word and the woman is neglecting her spiritual time in the Word, it's going to come out because they're going to have a marriage characterized by arguments. The sex life is not going to be where it should be. The communication is going to be down, like the whole list of things. All of those kind of metrics that go into how the marriage is doing, they're going to be failing because they're not taking care of their own spiritual life.
Yeah. Another way of saying that is that your marriage is a reflection of your relationship with the Lord.
Absolutely, yeah.
So typically, husband and wife who are walking with the Lord, they can have some bumps and bruises along the way. That's normal marital issues. There's normal sin in marriage. But if they're both got their eyes on Christ, then that's going to be a sweet union and a sweet marriage, because what does John 15 say? Apart from me, you can do nothing. That whole vine and the branch imagery, and nothing includes marriage.
That's right.
So you can't be having this wonderful, sweet, joyous marriage if you're both not intimately connected to the vine, which is Christ.
That's right.
So yeah, that is so crucial. I don't know if people really understand that. And you get into life and kids and work and the demands of keeping up a house and cars and all that stuff. What eventually begins to happen is your spiritual life begins to fade, begins to trickle. It begins to be eroded. And so that's another reason I think that couples wind up 20, 30 years down the road and they're like, do we even like each other?
Right.
Well, how have you been cultivating your relationship with Christ?
Right.
If that's not healthy, of course your marriage isn't going to be healthy.
Absolutely. And then I think the one, we got about 6 minutes left. And the one we talked about just this morning, which I had said is really close to my heart because it happened to my parents, was what do you do when the kids leave the home? So scenario is most families have kids, and kids will be in sports, and so typically, I'm just generalizing everything here for the sake of time. Mom's driving them around to sports practice, dad's at work. They come home at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night. You have dinner, some very topical conversations at the dinner table. Wake up in the morning, dad goes off to work, mom gets the kids ready for school, so on and so forth. And that's like that for 15, 20 years, depending on the age gaps in the kids. So we'll say hypothetically 25 years rolls by, the last kid's finally out of the house, and now you got mom and dad. And a lot of divorces take place there. You see this divorce from 18 to 25 years is extremely popular.
Because they've held it together for as long as the kids are in the house.
And they've stayed busy. And they've said, for the purpose of our kids, this is what we're doing all this for. And then all of a sudden they're sitting across the dinner table and there's no kids there as a buffer. And their whole day, which was spent around dad at work, mom shuttling kids to and fro, now they have to talk to each other and it's just silent in the house. How do we make sure that doesn't happen?
There's no commonality anymore. There's no unity anymore. They haven't cultivated that relationship through those child rearing years.
Right.
And so, we say it all the time, the priority relationship in the family is the husband and the wife, not the parents and the children.
Right.
That's an important relationship, mom and dad with the kids, and obviously the Bible has a lot to say about that relationship, but it's not the priority relationship. And I think sometimes parents think that. They think, well, I want to be good friends with my kids, and I want to do all these great things, and I want to hang out with my kids. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But if that's your primary focus and you neglect the person that you're raising those kids with, you've just severed the cord of that relationship.
And here's the reason why. The reason why is you have, once again, speaking in general terms, 18 years, your kids are there, and then they're gone.
Yeah, and if you have multiple kids, it could be 20, 25 years.
20, 25 years, and then they're gone. Say you have no more kids in the house, you've been married for 25 years. You're now looking at each other, and you've raised your kids to leave, which is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
But you haven't been paying attention to the spouse across the table. And so you've neglected the cultivation, as you said, with your spouse because your world became your children, not realizing that one day those kids are going to be gone, which they should be, and you're still going to be with your spouse.
So think about this. If you're married for 50 years, just throwing a number out, and if you parent for 20, 25 of those years at most, you still have half a lifetime with your spouse without kids.
Exactly.
And I think what happens is sometimes couples get in the parenting years and they can't see beyond that.
That's right.
Because it's all consuming and all demanding, and they get so intent on doing the things they need to do with their kids that they forget that probably, most likely, the second half of their marriage is going to have 0 kids.
That's right.
So that helps prioritize, I think, the things that mom and dad need to be thinking about in cultivating their marriage and their relationship.
So let's, for the last 2-3 minutes here, kind of a machine gun approach. What are some things that mom and dad can do to practically cultivate that relationship when there are kids in the house? Because I've seen this afterward. Lock the door. I've seen the after effect of this. You see the husband and wife sitting on the couch. There's 6 feet between them, and they're like this. We have 3 kids. They're in college, and we just don't like each other. So before they get there, aside from locking the door,
dad has to lead. Husband has to lead. The husband has to be the one that really makes that a priority. And
so how can he do that?
He's got to carve out time with his wife. He's got to study her. He's got to know her heart. 1 Peter 3:7 commands it. Yeah. Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way.
That's right.
You have to understand her. So a husband has to make that relationship with his wife a priority by time, affection, communication. I mean, those are probably the biggest ones right there. Time, affection, communication. You've got to spend time with her. You've got to communicate affection to her, and you've got to talk to her. And so whatever you need to do, I mean, I was joking about locking the door, but lock the door
Sometimes you got to do it.
Let the kids beat on it if they have to.
Right.
You have to spend time together. And you have to be, not just time though, but you have to be intentional with that time. Watch your movies and go out for dinner and date each other and do all those things. But in the midst of all that, you have to be talking about heart issues. You have to be talking about things that are going on in your heart towards each other to guard against that happening. And I do think the husband has to lead in that. And maybe the wife is the better communicator and she's more relational. That's fine. Let her, share her heart. But the husband has to pull that out. And he has to create an environment where you're talking about those things. Because if not, what happens is, in the first year or two, you put up a little brick wall, and then second, third, fourth, fifth year, again, another brick layer, and you're down the road 20, 30 years with a wall you can't see over anymore.
Yeah.
It's subtle, it's slow, it can happen almost imperceptibly. So I think those two need to just really make it a priority and do what you need to do. I mean, practically, you should be, if you can, go out for a meal once a week.
Yeah.
Take some time away once a year. Whatever you need to do to get time together and really focusing on the relationship. And I get it, it's hard when the kids are young and you just crawl into bed at 8:30 at night and you're barely awake.
Right.
So, but you have to be intentional with that.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point. When the kids are young, and say you have them close together or whatever, and so it's like double duty, but it's just a season. So as a husband, if you're saying, hey, this is just a season for 6 months, for a year, it's going to be hard, and tell your wife, hey, this is going to be hard. We're not going to have a lot of time to communicate, so I want to capitalize on the time that we do, which means maybe turn off the TV, don't watch the football game, whatever it happens to be, because the thing that matters is your relationship with your wife.
Yeah.
And so, but you need to communicate with her. You need to say, this is what it's going to look like for the next 6 months. You're going to be stuck here nursing our baby, or I'm going to be doing this, or whatever it looks like. But the problem is when things just kind of get thrown up in the air and you think everything is okay, like you said, you suddenly got those bricks, and the next thing you know, kids are out of the house, you've got a 40-foot wall up,
right,
and you're looking across and you're like, I don't even know who this person is anymore. So you got a 20-year gap in your relationship.
Yeah.
Like any other place in the world, that would be horrible. So let's make sure that it's not in our
And I would say
marriages.
when you sense that inclination in your heart, and I guarantee it'll come at some time, that's when you lean into that.
Yeah,
that's
good.
not when you pull back.
Yeah.
And the tendency is to pull back. Well, we haven't spent any time together, and man, the kids have taken up all of our time. And in your heart, and the fleshly response is just, I'm going to go live my own life.
Right.
No, at that moment, when you sense those inclinations, then you have to come back together.
I agree.
You have to lean into each other in those times.
So if your spouse says, man, I wish I was spending more time with you, you can't be like, oh yeah, me too. and walk away.
Exactly.
Like that's a good indication.
Yeah.
Go spend time with them. You know.
Exactly.
So, no, that's good. So that's our time. We do have a few more things that we've seen. You know, communicate about things like in-laws. Make sure you talk about differences. We did talk about trials that come upon us in marriage, different ways to communicate and stuff like that. But I would say the first three we talked about are probably the most pertinent to that. So, well, I hope that was helpful for you guys. Once again, if you have any more questions, feel free to send them to us. We'll do our best to answer whatever you have. Otherwise, we will continue on next week with our Family Matters series, and we'll start looking at some other aspects of the family relationship. So I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.